Chapter 1. What if your solitude is not a prison, but a forge? There is a silence that happens only in the deepest part of the night. It's a different kind of quiet from the one you find just after turning off the lights. This is a living silence, a silence that breathes. And in this breath, you can sometimes hear the most unsettling question of all. What if the very thing you've been running from, this feeling of being set apart, of being misunderstood, of carrying a weight no one else seems to see, what if that is not your flaw, but your raw material? What if your solitude is not a prison, but a forge? Let me tell you about a man who knew that forge, not as a metaphor, but as the very air he breathed. Picture, if you will, a world lit only by candle and fire. London in the late 1500s. The air is thick with the smell of the Thames and wood smoke, and in a room high up a man sits, Francis Bacon. His chair creaks a lonely song. Before him, a desk, a chaotic landscape of ink-stained parchment, a quill, and a single guttering flame that throws long, dancing shadows onto the walls. He is one of the most powerful men in England, a Lord Chancellor, a mind that dazzles courts. Yet here, in this room, he is utterly, profoundly alone. He isn't just writing, he is building, constructing a new way for humanity to see the world. And he is doing it from a place of deep, personal isolation. You see, to truly see the world, Bacon believed you had to first tear down the one you inherited. He called these inherited structures idols. The idols of the tribe, the flaws baked into human nature itself. The idols of the cave, the private prejudices carved out by our own unique experiences and education. Can you feel them? The cave you have built for yourself, with its familiar shadows and comforting distortions. We all live in one. He was asking a question that would have terrified his age, and perhaps still terrifies us. What if everything you think you know is wrong? What if the common sense of your tribe, the comfortable beliefs of your personal cave, are nothing but a collective dream? To ask this is to exile yourself. It is to step out of the warm, noisy tavern of public opinion and into the cold, clear night of your own mind. This is the forge. This is the solitude. And it is not a gentle place. It is a place of immense pressure. The pressure Bacon felt every day, navigating the treacherous politics of the court of Queen Elizabeth and King James. A man surrounded by people, yet trusted by none. A man of immense ambition who saw further than any of his peers, knowing that a single misstep could mean ruin, or worse, the tower. Can you feel that weight? The weight of wearing a mask so convincing you sometimes forget the face beneath it? That is the weight of a man building a new philosophy in the hidden chambers of his mind, while his public self plays the old games of power. He wrote of putting nature on the rack, to compel her to give up her secrets, a violent, almost cruel image. But is it so different from what we do to ourselves in our own moments of truth? In the still, small hours, when we finally put our own cherished assumptions, our own deepest fears, on the rack, we interrogate them. We demand to know why they hold such power over us. This is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of necessity. It is the work of the forge. The heat is the discomfort of challenging your own core beliefs. The hammer is the relentless questioning. And the anvil is the unwavering, solitary self that must bear the blows. So when you find yourself in that quiet, when you feel the walls of your own cave closing in, consider this. That feeling of separation, that ache of being the only one in the room who sees the crack in the facade. That is not a sign that you are broken. It is a sign that you are a builder. Bacon's solitude allowed him to see that humanity was asleep in a house built on sand, and he dedicated his life to laying a new foundation, stone by stone, in the quiet of his study. Your solitude, that quiet space you may fear, is where you get to build the architecture of your own character. It is where you temper your own truths. The world makes a lot of noise to convince you that being alone is to be lost. But what if the noise is the distraction, and the solitude is the only way to truly find your way? And as the first embers of that thought begin to cool in your mind, warming you with the idea that your quietest self is also your strongest, another, more subtle question begins to form in the shadows. It whispers that this act of building, of knowing, is not without a cost. For what is knowledge, if not a form of power? And what does that power ask of the soul that wields it? Chapter 2. Is knowledge not a form of power, but a form of love? We speak so easily of the pursuit of knowledge. We treat it as a career, a hobby, a pastime. We collect facts like trinkets. But what if we have it all backwards? What if knowledge is not a collection, but a surrender? What if the great hidden truth at the heart of learning is not about gaining power, but about practicing a profound and silent form of love? Let's return to that candlelit study. Watch Francis Bacon's hand as it moves across the page. He is not conquering. He is listening. He proposed a radical idea, that to truly understand the world, we must first silence ourselves. We must become like a child again, open, humble, before the vast complexity of creation. He called for a great cleansing of the mind, a sweeping away of all the preconceived notions, the idols that distort our vision. This is not the act of a general preparing for invasion. This is the act of a lover preparing for a guest. He is making a space, clean and empty, for truth to enter. Think of the last time you truly, deeply listened to someone, not to reply, not to interrupt, not to judge, but just to understand. You quieted your own internal monologue. You set aside your own agenda. In that moment, you were not exerting power. You were performing an act of reverence. You were saying without words, "Your truth matters to me." This is what Bacon was asking humanity to do for the natural world. To stop imposing our arrogant theories upon it, and to instead kneel down in the dust and observe. To study the veins of a leaf not as a symbol of something else, but for the intricate, miraculous thing it is. This is a philosophy born not from cold calculation, but from a kind of aching empathy for a world that has been misunderstood. He looked at the scholastic debates of his time, men arguing over how many angels could dance on the head of a pin, and he saw a tragic failure of love. They were in love with the sound of their own voices, with the elegance of their own systems. They had forgotten to love the thing they were supposedly talking about. The real, tangible, messy, beautiful world. There's a deep, emotional stake here. What is lost if we ignore this? We lose the world itself. We end up living in a hall of mirrors, surrounded only by reflections of our own ego, our own limited ideas. We become lords of a tiny, self-made domain, while the vast, whispering, magnificent kingdom of reality remains locked away outside our gates. Our lives become smaller, louder, and infinitely poorer. But if we embrace it, if we approach knowledge as a form of love, everything changes. The pursuit of a skill, the understanding of a historical event, the simple act of learning the name of a tree in your backyard. These are no longer just items on a resume. They are acts of connection. They are a slow, patient courtship of the universe. This is the peace that Bacon, for all his political turmoil, must have felt in his study. The peace of the craftsman who loves his wood, the gardener who loves his soil. It is the satisfaction that doesn't come from conquest, but from communion. The weight of the manuscript in his hands was not the weight of power, but the weight of a relationship, a secret, silent love affair with truth itself. And so we learn to build in the quiet of our solitude, and to know through the grace of a loving attention. But this leaves one final, gentle mystery. What becomes of the builder? What is the final, quiet truth of a life dedicated not to being remembered, but to remaking the world? The answer does not shout from the rooftops. It waits patiently in the nature of the seed itself. Chapter 3. Can a man be a secret architect and find peace in the unseen foundation? We spend our lives building monuments to ourselves, a career, a reputation, a legacy. We want to be remembered. We want our name carved into the stone of the world, to shout into the future, "I was here." But what if the most profound work is done by those who are willing to be forgotten? What if the greatest architect is not the one who places the final glittering spire on the cathedral, but the one who designed the hidden foundation, deep in the dark, damp earth that makes the spire possible? Francis Bacon never saw his great vision come to life. He died with his great instauration, his plan for the total renewal of human knowledge, largely unfulfilled, a magnificent, half-built cathedral of the mind. He was like a man planting a forest of oak trees, knowing he would never sit in their shade. He was laying a foundation for a future he would never see, and there is a profound, almost heartbreaking peace in that. Imagine him again, in his final years. The political glory is gone. He has fallen from power, disgraced, his public life in ruins. The world would have said he was a failure. But in his private chamber, the work continues. The scratch of the quill, the patient, meticulous ordering of thought. He is no longer building for fame or for redemption in the eyes of the court. He is building for an idea, for a future generation he will never meet. He is writing a letter to you, to me, to anyone who would one day stumble into the quiet room of his thought and find the tools he left behind. This is the secret architect. He understood that the true work is often invisible. The planter of the seed does not see the tree. The designer of the foundation does not get his name on the plaque by the door. His legacy was not a statue, but a method, the scientific method. A way of asking questions, of testing, of observing. He gave the world a key, and then quietly faded from view, leaving others to unlock the doors he could only dream of. There is an immense freedom in this. It untethers you from the anxious hunger for immediate results, for applause, for validation. It asks you a different question. What can you build that is bigger than your own lifespan? What seed can you plant today that will become a forest in 100 years? It doesn't have to be a grand scientific revolution. It can be the patience you show a child, planting a seed of confidence that will flower long after you're gone. It can be the integrity you bring to your work, strengthening a foundation of trust that others will build upon. It can be a simple, kind word that alters the course of someone's dark day in a way you will never, ever know. This is the final quiet truth. The peace that Bacon found and that he offers to us is the peace of the foundation. It is the satisfaction of knowing that your life, in all its quiet, unseen effort, its private struggles, and its hidden loves, has contributed a single essential stone to a cathedral you will never see completed. Your name may not be on it, but your strength is in it. Your solitude is in its walls. Your love is in its mortar. So, let go of the need to see the finished product. Let go of the noise of recognition. Your work, your quiet integrity, your private growth. It is not for nothing. It is the unseen foundation of everything that is to come. And in the deep breathing silence of this night, that can be the most comforting thought of all. You have built, you have loved, you have laid a stone, and that is enough. Now, rest. Chapter 4. What if the mind is a garden that must first be allowed to grow wild? Imagine, for a moment, that everything you think you know is a weed, not for its lack of value, but for its aggressive, untamed nature. It has grown without your permission, choked out other more delicate possibilities, and convinced you that its dominance is the only natural state of your mind. What if the first, and most radical, step toward truth is not to plant, but to deliberately let the entire field go fallow, to withhold the hand of judgment, and simply watch what has taken root in the dark soil of your consciousness? This is the quiet, almost heretical beginning of Francis Bacon's method. A method not of addition, but of a necessary cleansing subtraction. It is a thought for the weary, for the man who has spent a lifetime building structures of knowledge, only to feel the walls themselves have become his cage. What if the key was not a better blueprint, but the courage to walk outside and see the cage for what it is? Picture him, not as the grand Lord Chancellor in his robes, but as a man in a solitary chamber, the world outside muffled by thick walls and a deeper, self-imposed silence. The air is cool, still. A single candle throws long, dancing shadows across a desk, littered not with answers, but with questions. He picks up a quill, and instead of writing a law or a decree, he begins to catalog the subtle, invisible laws that govern the human mind itself. He calls them idols, not gods to be worshipped, but phantoms to be understood. The idols of the tribe, the inherent distortions of human nature itself, the way our senses and our very biology bend the world to fit our shape. The idols of the cave, the personal den we have each carved out, lined with the books we prefer, the experiences that have scarred us, the private superstitions we mistake for universal laws. Can you feel your own cave? The particular texture of its walls, worn smooth by your own unique worries and wonders? He writes of the idols of the marketplace, perhaps the most insidious of all, the tyranny of words. The way a poorly defined term, a fashionable phrase, a slogan repeated in the public square can short-circuit an entire generation's capacity to think. We believe we are using language to communicate, when so often language is using us. We fight over words we have never truly defined, building fortresses on foundations of mist. And finally, the idols of the theater, the grand received systems of philosophy, the dogmas and ideologies we inherit, unchallenged, and then perform upon the stage of our own lives, believing the script to be reality itself. Can you sense the weight of a script you did not write? A role you have been playing for so long, you've forgotten the feel of your own face beneath the mask? This is not an accusation. It is a diagnosis. And the diagnosis is a form of profound compassion. Bacon is not telling you that you are foolish for having these weeds in your garden. He is suggesting that everyone does. It is the default state of the untended mind. The work, then, the great and liberating work, is to become a different kind of gardener. One who does not rush to plant the seeds of new doctrines, but who first, with infinite patience, walks the land and maps the existing flora. You must become a gentle surveyor of your own soul, to notice, without immediate judgment, the prejudice that springs up when you hear a certain word. To observe, with quiet curiosity, the old fear that shades your opinion on a certain matter. This is the wildness. This is the necessary, chaotic, and fertile wilderness that must be allowed to exist before any true order can be imposed. This is the work of a lifetime, of course. It is not done in an afternoon of fierce resolution. It is done in the quiet moments like this one, in the half-light between wakefulness and sleep. It is the moment you catch yourself in a rigid opinion, and instead of clinging to it, you simply loosen your grip and ask, what idol is speaking now? Is this the voice of my tribe, my cave, the marketplace, the theater? And in that question, a space opens. A small silent clearing in the dense woods of your mind. And in that clearing, something new can eventually take root, something that is truly, authentically your own. This is the peace that Bacon offers, not the peace of certainty, but the far deeper, more profound peace of an honest uncertainty, the peace of a man who has stopped fighting the ghosts in his own house and has instead simply lit a lamp and begun to learn their names. The garden must grow wild, you see, so that you can finally see what is actually there, and not merely what you have been told should be there. And in that seeing, a more authentic order, one that feels less like a cage and more like a home, can slowly, gently begin to form. As the image of that wild, fallow garden lingers in the quiet of your mind, as you feel the relief of not having to build or even to plant, but simply to observe, it leads us to a more delicate and perhaps more unsettling question. Because once the ground is clear and the mind is honest, a new kind of work must begin. A work that feels less like gardening and more like a slow, methodical dissection. What happens when the love of truth requires a kind of gentle cruelty, a willingness to take apart the very things we hold most sacred just to see how they were made? Chapter 5. Is the anatomy of truth a kind of gentle cruelty? There is a romance to not knowing, a mystery that can feel warmer, safer than the cold, hard edges of a fact. We wrap ourselves in the comfort of the unexplained, like a well-worn blanket. But what if that comfort is a lie? And what if the act of uncovering the truth, while necessary, carries with it a certain violence, a gentle cruelty? Francis Bacon looked out at a world enchanted by grand, sweeping stories, theories that explained everything and therefore proved nothing. He saw a civilization that preferred the beautiful lie to the awkward, complicated fact. And he proposed a method that was, at its heart, a form of intellectual dissection. The word itself, anatomy, comes from the Greek, to cut apart. And to cut something apart, even with the most loving and careful hands, is to destroy its wholeness. It is an act that cannot be undone. Imagine him again in his study. The candle has burned lower. The silence is now a presence, a collaborator. He is not contemplating the idols of the mind now, but the very substance of the world. And he proposes a simple, devastatingly effective tool, induction. Not the flash of genius, not the divine revelation from on high, but the slow, patient, almost tedious accumulation of facts. You are to become a collector of phenomena, a gatherer of every single instance you can find, like a naturalist collecting strange beetles and pressing unknown leaves into a heavy book. You build a vast, cumbersome, and hopelessly detailed catalog of nature's comings and goings. And then you start to cut. You separate the things that are always present when a phenomenon occurs from the things that are sometimes present, from the things that are always absent. You are looking for the bone structure of reality, the hidden jointures and ligaments that hold the world together beneath its skin of appearances. This is the gentle cruelty. It is the cruelty of disenchantment. To explain the rainbow is to lose its magic, some say. To understand the precise mechanics of the human heart is to strip it of its poetry. Bacon would argue the opposite. He would whisper that the real magic, the deeper poetry, lies in the intricate clockwork, in the breathtaking elegance of the design. The rainbow, understood, is not less beautiful. It is infinitely more so, because its beauty is no longer an accident, but a consequence of the fundamental nature of light and water. The real romance is in the truth, but to get there, you must be willing to kill the superficial romance. You must be willing to take the living, breathing mystery and, with steady hands, lay it out on the table and examine its parts. This requires a certain toughness of spirit, a certain emotional resilience. It is the toughness of a surgeon who must cut into a beloved face to remove a cancer. The act is brutal, but the intention is pure, is salvific. And where does this leave you, the seeker? It asks you to cultivate a divided self. One part of you remains the poet, the lover, the man who feels the awe of a starry night. The other part becomes the quiet anatomist, the man who, even in the midst of that awe, begins to catalog, to question, to seek the underlying laws. This is not a coldness. It is a higher form of reverence. It is the difference between a tourist in a cathedral, admiring the stained glass, and the master architect who understands the precise balance of thrust and counter-thrust that allows those very windows to exist without the walls collapsing. The tourist's wonder is simple. The architect's wonder is complex, layered, and unshakable. One is based on ignorance, the other on profound understanding. The anatomy of truth is a gentle cruelty because it asks you to sacrifice the simple wonder for the complex one. It asks you to trade the comfort of the mystery for the power and the burden of the revealed mechanism. And so, as you drift in this liminal space, consider the things you hold as beautifully mysterious in your own life: a relationship, a passion, a deep-seated fear. What would it mean to dissect it? Not with the clumsy, harsh tools of cynicism, but with the careful, loving hands of the anatomist of truth. To look at its components, its history, its triggers, its needs. You might fear that understanding it would destroy it. But what if, in understanding it, you finally learn how to truly care for it? What if the ultimate act of love for a thing is not to leave it in the dark, wrapped in mystery, but to bring it into the light and see it, truly see it, for all that it is and all that it is not? This is the difficult peace Bacon offers. It is the peace that comes not from ignorance, but from clarity. It is the peace of the surgeon when the operation is a success. The wound is real, the process was harsh, but the patient is saved. The body of knowledge is healed and made whole again on a firmer foundation. And this leads us to the final, most personal reckoning. For the man who undertakes this work, who clears the wild garden of his mind, and who practices the gentle cruelty of dissection, can no longer see the world as others do. He sees the blueprint. He sees the foundations, the load-bearing walls, the hidden stresses in the structures of society, of knowledge, of the soul itself. And with this sight comes a profound and permanent solitude, a weight. The question then becomes not about the work itself, but about the worker. Can such a man, who sees the cracks in the edifice that everyone else takes for solid, ever truly find rest? Or is his vision a sentence to a lifetime of vigilance, of seeing what others cannot, and bearing the silent burden of that knowledge? Chapter 6. Can a man who sees the blueprint ever truly rest? To see the blueprint is to be estranged from the finished building. While others admire the grand facade, the ornate decorations, the bustling life within the rooms, your eye is drawn inexorably to the single, slightly uneven stress point on the foundational drawing. You see the flaw in the design, the potential for collapse that is invisible to everyone else. You live with a constant, low-grade hum of foresight. This was Francis Bacon's world. He was not just a philosopher in a study. He was a statesman, a lawyer, a man of the world who navigated the glittering, treacherous court of a king. He saw the idols governing the minds of powerful men. He saw the faulty logic underpinning the laws of the land. He saw the entire structure of human knowledge as a magnificent but dangerously unstable castle, built on the sand of superstition and untested assumption. And to see this is to carry a weight that can never be fully set down. Imagine the sheer exhaustion of that vision. To sit in a council chamber, and while others debate politics and personalities, you are seeing the philosophical underpinnings of their arguments, the marketplace idols in their slogans, the theatrical performances in their posturing. You are living in two worlds at once, the surface world of appearances and the submerged world of real, causal forces. It is a form of intellectual tinnitus, a constant ringing of a deeper truth beneath the everyday noise. Where does such a man find rest? How does he switch off this relentless analytical engine? The simple, heartbreaking answer is that he likely does not fully. His rest is not the rest of the oblivious. It is not the deep, dreamless sleep of the man who has no questions. His rest is the rest of the watchman. It is a lighter, more vigilant sleep, one ear always tuned to the wind, listening for the sound of shifting foundations. And yet, there is a peculiar, profound satisfaction in this very burden. There is a peace that is not the absence of weight, but the confidence to bear it. This is the peace of the architect who knows his foundation is sound. After a lifetime of pointing out the flaws in other blueprints, Bacon was attempting to draft a new one. His great unfinished work, the Great Instauration, the Great Restoration, was his plan for the rebuilding of all human knowledge from the ground up on a foundation of observation and method. He knew he would not live to see the building completed. He would not even live to see the foundations fully dug. His work was to draw the plans, to clear the site, to gather the materials. His was the rest of the sower who knows he will not see the harvest, but who has absolute faith in the quality of the seed and the fertility of the soil. His rest was prospective. It was a rest built on hope, on a faith not in gods or kings, but in the future capability of humanity, if only it would adopt the right tools. For you, in the quiet of your own life, this is the final invitation, to make peace with the blueprint. We all, in our own ways, become architects of something, a family, a career, a personal code of ethics. And in building, we inevitably see the flaws, the compromises, the places where our structure does not align with our ideal. This can be a source of endless anxiety, a reason to never rest, or it can be a source of a deeper, more resilient peace. The peace that comes from knowing you are working from the best blueprint you can with the most honest materials available to you. Your rest will not be the rest of the finished. It will be the rest of the faithful builder. It is the satisfaction of a long day spent laying bricks. Your hands raw, your back tired, but your spirit quieted by the certainty that the wall you built today is straight, is true, and will hold. So, as sleep begins to gently dissolve the sharp edges of your day, consider the blueprints you hold, the plans for your own life. Have you been trying to find rest by ignoring the flaws in the design? Or can you find a more profound rest by accepting the burden of sight, by saying, I see the uneven stress point. I cannot fix it tonight, but I see it. And that knowledge itself is the first and most necessary step. This is the legacy of the secret architect. It is not a legacy of public monuments, but of private, unwavering integrity. It is the slow, patient, often lonely work of ensuring that the foundation, however unseen, is sound. And in that work, in that commitment to the unseen truth, there is a fatigue, yes, but there is also a dignity, and ultimately a quiet, unshakable honor that no one can bestow upon you and no one can take away. A peace that is not a destination, but the quality of the journey itself. Now, rest. The work will be there in the morning, and you will see it all the more clearly, after a night of dreaming not of finished palaces, but of honest, well-drawn lines. Close your eyes now, and let the weight of the day begin to dissolve. Let the light behind your eyelids soften into a deep, welcoming dark. And into this quiet, I want to bring a voice, not a loud one, not a voice of lectures or certainty, but the voice of a man sitting in a cold, stone-walled room, the quill in his hand not scratching, but waiting. The fire is low. The world outside is silent. And he is thinking about the architecture of truth, about the hidden cost of seeing what others cannot. This is the dark philosophy of Francis Bacon, and tonight we don't study it. We let it seep into us like cool water into thirsty ground. We listen not with our minds, but with our souls, ready for sleep. Chapter 7. What if the greatest truths are whispered in a language of pain? There is a silence that comes before a confession. It's the silence of a man weighing the consequences of his own honesty. And in that silence, if you listen closely, you can almost hear the ghost of Francis Bacon, a man who understood that the path to a clearer world is paved with the sharp, broken stones of personal suffering. We often think of philosophy as something born in clean, sunlit rooms, a product of pure intellect. But what if we have it backwards? What if the most profound insights, the ones that change the very axis upon which a life spins, are not found in triumph, but in the quiet, humiliating aftermath of a fall? What if truth is not a light you find, but a scar that forms over a wound you'd rather forget? Imagine him for a moment. Not the Lord Chancellor, not the celebrated orator, but the man stripped of it all. The year is 1621. The air in the House of Lords is thick with spite and the sweet smell of political blood. He stands accused, bribery, corruption. The words are like stones thrown at a stained glass window. And he, who had built his life on the pinnacle of reason and order, is brought low by the very human mess he sought to rise above. He confesses. He is imprisoned in the Tower of London, his reputation shattered, his career in ashes. And in that cold, confined space, something in him breaks open. We spend our lives building fortresses against pain. We construct careers, reputations, relationships, walls to keep out the chaos. We believe these structures protect us. But what if they also insulate us? What if the comfort we so fiercely guard is the very thing that blinds us? Bacon, in his cell, had every wall torn down. The title, the power, the respect, all of it gone. And in that stark, barren landscape of the self, with nowhere to look but inward, a different kind of vision becomes possible. It is the vision of the shipwrecked sailor, who, having lost his vessel, finally learns to read the stars. His great project, the Instauratio Magna, the Great Instauration, was a blueprint for rebuilding all of human knowledge. He wanted to purge the mind of its idols, its false gods of preconception and tradition. It was an intellectual endeavor, yes, a monumental one. But I wonder, were its deepest roots intellectual at all? Or was the conviction behind it forged in that cell, in the visceral understanding of how fragile our constructs truly are? He wrote of the need to torture nature's secrets from her. It's a violent, almost cruel metaphor. But isn't that the language of his own life? Hadn't he been tortured? Hadn't his own secrets been forced from him? There is a temptation, when we face a personal cataclysm, to see it as an end, the failure from which there is no return, the betrayal that forever poisons trust, the loss that empties the world of meaning. We curl around the pain, making it the center of our story. But what if Bacon's dark philosophy offers a different path? What if the pain is not the center of the story, but the key to a door you didn't even know was there? His fall from grace was not the end of his philosophy. In a profound way, it was the beginning of its deepest validation. It was the lived experience of his own method, the breaking down of a flawed model, so a truer one could be built. Think of a time your own life fractured, a plan that collapsed, a heart that broke, a future that evaporated. In that moment, the world as you knew it ceased to exist. The old maps were useless. And in that disorienting silence, what did you see? Perhaps for the first time you saw the raw materials of your own character, stripped of the story you told about yourself. You saw who your true friends were. You saw your own resilience or your own fear. You saw, with terrible clarity, what actually mattered when everything you thought mattered was taken away. This is the language of pain. It is a brutal, unforgiving grammar, but it speaks only truth. It whispers of your dependencies, your vanities, your hidden strengths. It is the dark, fertile soil in which a more authentic self can take root. Bacon, in his exile, did not stop thinking. He returned to his work, but his work was now deepened, shaded by the lived knowledge of human frailty, his own included. He had planned to command nature, to build a new Atlantis, but he had learned, in his bones, that the first territory we must conquer and map is the treacherous, beautiful landscape of our own flawed humanity. The greatest truth he might have ever stumbled upon was this: that wisdom is not the avoidance of suffering, but the ability to be reshaped by it, to let the heat of your own failures temper you, like steel in the forge, rather than shatter you like glass. So, as you lie here in the quiet dark, consider the aches you carry, the small shames, the quiet regrets, the scars you trace with your memory. Do not push them away tonight. Do not see them as enemies. What if they are not flaws in your story, but the very texture of it? What if they are the unique, painful, and irreplaceable language in which the universe has been whispering its secrets to you, and you alone? The man who has never been broken has only a theory of strength. The man who has fallen and who has chosen to listen to the silence that followed holds a piece of the dark, raw material of truth itself. And with that, you can let it all go. The day, the thought, the memory. Let it soften and fade into the welcome dark. And as that thought settles, like dust in a silent room, another door swings open on a quieter hinge, leading us from the private theater of a man's pain to the grand, shadowy stage of the world he sought to decipher. Chapter 8. Is the world's stage merely a shadow of a deeper, darker rehearsal? We move through our days, believing in the solidity of things, the handshake of a colleague, the headline in the paper, the edict of a ruler, the simple cause and effect of a stone dropped into a pond. This is the world of appearances, the stage upon which our public lives are performed. But what if this stage, with all its drama and certainty, is just the echo of something else? What if the real play, the one that determines the plot, the characters, even the ending, is happening in the darkness backstage, in a language of forces and forms we are not meant to see? Francis Bacon looked out at the world of his time, a world of courtly intrigue, of scientific ignorance of political theater, and he saw not the truth of things, but a performance, a mask, and he dedicated his life to pulling back the curtain. He called this the idols of the theater. These are the dogmas, the systems, the philosophies we inherit and perform without ever questioning the script. We take our roles, we speak our lines, we move across the set, believing it to be real. The church says, "The earth is the center of all things," and we nod. The ancient philosopher says, "Nature abhors a vacuum," and we repeat it. The king says, "My right is divine," and we kneel. We are actors in a play written by long-dead men, on a stage built by tradition, and we are so captivated by the performance, we forget we are wearing masks. Bacon proposed something radical and deeply unsettling. He suggested we must walk off this stage. We must step out of the theater of received wisdom and go into the raw, messy, and silent workshop of nature. This is his dark philosophy, not a rejection of the world, but a commitment to seeing the machinery behind the spectacle. It is the choice to trade the comforting glare of the footlights for the dim, solitary light of a lantern in a vast, unknown workshop. It is a lonely path, because on the stage there is camaraderie, there is applause, there is the warmth of the crowd. In the workshop, there is only you, the cold tools of inquiry, and the silent, waiting raw material of reality. Think of your own life, the narratives you have accepted, the story of your career path, the script of what it means to be a successful man, a good father, a respected member of your community. How much of this is a performance? How much is a role you are playing because it was handed to you? This is not to say these roles are without value, but Bacon's question whispers to us from across the centuries. Do you know who wrote your script? Have you ever dared to look into the darkness behind the set? The man who does this, the man who questions the fundamental premises of his own life, often finds a profound solitude. He can no longer take comfort in the easy answers of the stage. He sees the strings holding up the scenery. He hears the prompter's cues. And it can make the performance itself feel hollow. even absurd. But here is the secret hope nestled in this dark realization. If the world is a stage, then the sets can be changed, the scripts can be rewritten. Your role is not fixed for all time. The man who understands that he is in a theater is no longer a mere actor. He becomes, potentially, a playwright. This was Bacon's ultimate ambition. He wasn't just a critic of the old play, he was drafting a new one. His new Atlantis was a vision of a world governed not by superstition and inherited error, but by patient, humble, collective inquiry into the true workings of nature. He imagined a society of seekers, not performers. A world where the real action was not on the public stage of power, but in the private, hallowed halls of discovery. So as you drift on the edge of sleep, let the solid world soften at its edges. Let the certainties of the day begin to dissolve. Ask yourself, in the gentlest way, what are the stages upon which I perform? What are the lines I speak without thinking? And what would it feel like, for just a moment, to step into the wings, to stand in the quiet darkness backstage and simply observe the machinery? There is no pressure to dismantle it tonight, no need to rewrite the script. Only the quiet, liberating realization that the stage is not the whole of reality, that behind the bright, noisy performance of your life, there is a deeper, quieter, and more profound rehearsal always underway, a place where you are not the actor, but the silent, watching architect of your own understanding. And this act of watching, of pulling back the curtain, leads us inevitably to the most intimate stage of all, the one inside our own skulls. For what if the most cunning actor, the most persuasive playwright, and the most formidable stage manager has been living in your mind all along? Chapter 9. What if the idols of your mind are the only true prisons? The heaviest chains are not the ones forged of iron, they are the ones woven from thought. Invisible, weightless, they can bind a man more effectively than any dungeon. Francis Bacon knew this. He understood that before we can hope to understand the world outside, we must first confront the tyrants within. He gave these internal tyrants a name, the idols of the mind. And he mapped their territory with the grim precision of a man charting his own private hell. This is the deepest, and in many ways, the most disturbing layer of his dark philosophy, because it suggests that the greatest obstacle to truth is not a lack of information, but the very architecture of the instrument we use to perceive it. The prison is not the world. The prison is the mind itself. He spoke of the idols of the tribe, the deceptions built into human nature itself, our tendency to see patterns where none exist, to believe what we wish were true, to be swayed by emotion over evidence. We are, by our very biology, flawed instruments of perception. Then the idols of the cave, the personal demons born from our unique upbringing, education, and habits. The man raised in a library sees a world of books. The man raised in a forge sees a world of hammers and anvils. Each of us lives in a private cave, watching shadows on the wall and mistaking them for the sunlit world outside. Then the idols of the marketplace, the tyranny of words, how language itself, poorly defined, can trap us in endless, meaningless debates. We fight over terms like freedom or justice, as if we all mean the same thing, while sailing past each other in the night. And finally, the most insidious of all, the idols of the theater. Those grand philosophical systems we discussed, the dogmas we adopt without question, which then color everything we see. This is a bleak portrait. It suggests that we are not rational beings occasionally led astray, but that our very process of reasoning is a minefield of inherent biases and prefabricated errors. We are, in a sense, haunted houses, and the ghosts are the habits of our own thought. They whisper to us. They distort our senses. They present their flawed conclusions as undeniable reality. A man who is angry will see insults in neutral glances. A man who is fearful will see threats in innocent changes. A man who believes the world is against him will find a mountain of evidence to support his claim, blind to the vast landscape of goodwill that surrounds him. His idols have built him a prison, and they have given him the key, disguised as a weapon. But here, in this profound darkness, Bacon offers not despair, but a strange and quiet kind of liberation. Because if the prison is of your own mind's making, then the key must also be there. The first and most crucial step to freedom is to simply know that you are in a prison, to recognize the warden's face as your own. This is the work of a lifetime, a slow, patient, and deeply humble process of self-observation. It is the work of catching your own mind in the act of its deceptions, not to punish yourself, but to understand the mechanism. To see the idol of the tribe when you leap to a conclusion, and to pause. To recognize the idol of the cave when you dismiss an idea because it doesn't fit your personal narrative, and to reconsider. To spot the idol of the marketplace when you find yourself in a heated argument over a word, and to step back and define your terms. This is not the flashy freedom of a revolution. It is the quiet, internal freedom of a man who has learned to sit in the silence of his own cell and, for the first time, truly see the walls for what they are. It is the freedom that comes from no longer being a puppet to your own unconscious prejudices. It is the peace that descends when you stop trying to force the world to conform to the script written by your idols, and instead, you begin to listen to the world as it actually is. This is the core of the Baconian method, a purging, a cleansing, a preparatory darkness. It is the philosophical equivalent of a fast, of a silence, of a meditation. It is making the mind a blank slate, not out of ignorance, but out of a profound and disciplined wisdom. So tonight, as sleep draws near and the boundary between your waking mind and your dreaming mind begins to blur, I invite you to lay down the burden of being certain, to release the need to have the world figured out. Your mind, with all its beautiful, flawed, and unique idols, has done enough work for today. It has performed. It has analyzed. It has worried. It has judged. It is time to give it rest. The truth of the world and the truth of yourself is not a problem to be solved in a day. It is a quiet presence, waiting in the darkness behind your thoughts. It does not demand anything of you. It simply is. And for now, that is enough. It is more than enough. Let the idols sleep. Let the arguments fade. Let the stage go dark. And in that blessed, silent darkness, simply rest. Chapter 10. What if the greatest rebellion is to serve in silence? There is a quiet that comes not from an absence of sound, but from an abundance of restraint. It is the quiet of a man who knows a devastating truth, but for reasons known only to him, has chosen to hold his tongue. It is the quiet of the deep ocean floor, where unimaginable pressures are held in a perfect still balance. And it is in this specific, heavy quiet that we might finally hear the man, Francis Bacon. Not the Lord Chancellor, not the father of empiricism, but the secret revolutionary who understood that the most potent form of insurrection is not a shout in the square, but a whispered correction in the king's ear. Think of the rebellions you know, the dramatic ones, the barricades, the fiery pamphlets, the glorious and foolish stand against the guns. They have their place in the storybooks. But what of the rebellion that happens in the mind of a courtier as he bows? What of the insurrection plotted not in a tavern, but in the syntax of a legal document, in the careful phrasing of a piece of flattery meant not to please, but to subtly redirect the power of the throne? This is the darker, more patient art. This is the rebellion of the root, not the flower. The flower is cut down in a day. The root, working in silence underground, can crack the foundation of a palace. And Francis Bacon was a man of roots. He served two monarchs, Elizabeth and James, in an age where the court was a glittering, venomous snake pit. To survive, one had to play the game. To advance, one had to master it. And he did. He rose to the highest legal office in the land. He wore the robes. He performed the rituals. He spoke the language of power and privilege. On the surface, he was the ultimate servant of the crown, a pillar of the very establishment. But beneath the surface, in the private chamber of his mind, a very different project was underway. He was studying the crown itself. He was dissecting its mechanisms, its weaknesses, its illusions. He was serving the king, yes, but he was serving a far larger, more dangerous idea. The idea that truth should not come from the king's decree or from the dusty books of ancient philosophers, but from the humble, patient observation of the world itself. This is the profound and lonely paradox. To overthrow the old sclerotic ways of thinking, he had to work from within the very system those ways had built. He had to use the language of the court to draft the blueprints for the court's own intellectual obsolescence. Every time he put on his ceremonial robes, he was clothing himself in the enemy's uniform. Every time he offered a piece of advice to King James, he was planting a seed that, if it grew, would eventually shade the very throne he stood before. Can you feel the immense psychological tension of that? To be a double agent in the war for human understanding. To have your rebellion look, to all the world, like loyal service. There is no glory in it. No one sings songs about the man who subtly amended a trade policy. No one erects a statue for the courtier who, through a well-timed whisper, prevented a foolish war. The reward for this kind of rebellion is simply the quiet, cold satisfaction of having shifted the world just a degree on its axis, and the terrible loneliness of knowing that no one will ever know you did it. This is a loneliness that any man who has ever held a family together, or guided a company through a silent crisis, or buried his own dreams for the sake of a larger responsibility, will recognize. It is the loneliness of the architect who designs the foundation, but never gets to put his name on the gleaming facade. You have done the work. You have borne the weight. You have made the quiet, correct choice that nobody saw, that nobody will ever thank you for. And in the eyes of the world, you were simply doing your duty. You were just a servant. But you and I, and perhaps Francis Bacon, we know the truth. That duty, when chosen as a strategy and not as a fate, is the most potent form of power. That silence, when it is a chosen vessel for observation and not an empty void, is the most resonant form of speech. So as you lie here in the quiet of your own room, consider the rebellions you have fought, not in the open, but in the closed rooms of your own life. The time you held your tongue when a cutting remark was on its lips, not out of weakness, but out of a strategic grace. The time you played the company man, not because you had no spine, but because you were building a bridge for your team to cross later. These are not compromises. They are the moves of a master game played on a board only you can see. Francis Bacon's life whispers to us that the world is not changed only by the defiant who are cast out, but often by the patient who are allowed to remain. That to serve in silence is not to surrender. It is to bide your time. It is to learn the enemy's routines, his passwords, his weaknesses. It is the rebellion of the stonecutter, who knows that the cathedral will be dedicated to a saint, but that it will stand only because of the precise, invisible placement of his keystone. He serves the saint, but he is loyal to the law of gravity. And in the end, the law of gravity is the only thing that truly holds up the world. Let that question settle, the idea of a quiet, strategic service. It leads us, naturally, to a deeper, more intimate wound. For if a man spends his life learning to work from within a system, to dissect the world with a surgeon's calm, what happens to the man himself? Where does the surgeon go when the operation is over? Chapter 11. Can a mind that dissects the world ever truly belong to it? Imagine a scalpel, cool, polished, stainless. Its entire purpose, its reason for being, is to separate, to carefully, precisely divide one tissue from another, to distinguish nerve from vessel, healthy flesh from sickness. It is a master of boundaries. It is the embodiment of clarity through separation. Now, imagine that scalpel had a consciousness. What would its experience of the world be? It could never simply feel the warmth of a body. It would analyze the heat conductivity of the skin. It could never know the embrace of a hand. It would only assess the tensile strength of the grip. This is the hidden price of the analytical mind. This is the profound, personal solitude of Francis Bacon, and perhaps of every man who has ever made a practice of seeing the world not for what it feels like, but for what it is. Bacon gave us the scientific method, a glorious, world-changing gift. A process of breaking down the complex into simple, testable parts. He taught us to take nothing on authority, to question everything, to let nature herself answer our inquiries through patient experiment. He handed us the tools to build the modern world. But what does this method do to the man who wields it as his primary way of being? To live such a life is to live in a state of perpetual deconstruction. A sunset is no longer a moment of awe. It is a question of light refraction and atmospheric particles. A piece of music is not a journey for the soul. It is a sequence of mathematical frequencies and harmonic structures. The mind becomes a laboratory, and everything that enters it is placed upon the examining table. And you cannot love something that is lying on your examining table. You can only understand it. This is the gentle, tragic cruelty of the intellectual. The very power that makes him feel clear and potent in the world is the same power that exiles him from its simple, unanalyzed joys. Bacon, in his writing, speaks of the idols of the mind, the false gods of habit, of language, of dogma, that distort our perception. His life's work was to smash those idols. But in the rubble of the shattered idols, what remains? Only the cold, clean floor of the empty temple, and a man kneeling on that floor, alone with his own flawless and perhaps joyless clarity. We see this in the man's own life. His relationships were often strategic, political. His marriage was childless and by all accounts distant. He was accused of corruption, of betraying a friend for political gain. Now, I am not here to judge the man, but to understand the pattern. A mind trained to see the utility in everything, the leverage points, the causes and effects, can easily begin to see people as components in a system. It is not necessarily malice. It is a form of myopia, the ultimate professional deformation. When your greatest virtue is the ability to dissect, you risk losing the ability to connect. Your world becomes a collection of separate, intelligible things, and you are the lone consciousness observing them, categorizing them, but never fully merging with them. And perhaps you have felt a whisper of this in your own life. That moment at a family gathering where instead of simply laughing with the crowd, you find yourself observing the social dynamics, analyzing the patterns of conversation. That moment of professional triumph where instead of bathing in the satisfaction, you are already breaking down the next challenge, seeing the currents of ambition and fear in the eyes of your colleagues. It is a lonely clarity. It is the burden of the one who sees the scaffolding behind the beautiful facade. You can never again simply enjoy the play. You are always aware of the stagehands, the lighting rig, the script. This is the cost of wisdom. This is the tax on vision. But here in the quiet, let us not see it as a curse, but as a different kind of path, the path of the anchorite, the hermit, who finds God not in the communal chant, but in the crushing silence of his cell. Bacon's mind was his cell. His relentless analysis was his form of prayer. His belonging was not to the transient, messy world of human affection, but to the eternal, cold and beautiful architecture of natural law. He belonged to truth with a capital T, and belonging to an abstraction is a lonely kingdom, but it is a kingdom nonetheless. So as you feel yourself drifting from the warm, messy connections of the world, do not despair that you are broken. Consider that you may, like Bacon, be paying the price for a different kind of sight. You are the scalpel. And the scalpel does not belong in the drawer with the spoons and the butter knives. It has a different purpose, a different home. Its loneliness is the mark of its edge. And from this isolation, from this state of being a perpetual observer, a final gentle question arises. If we have broken all the external idols and then turned our tools upon our own minds, what is left? When the analysis is complete and the laboratory of the mind is finally, utterly silent, what then? Chapter 12. Must we break the idols of our own intellect to see in the dark? We spend a lifetime building a mind we can live in. We furnish it with certainties. We hang the trophies of our accomplishments on the walls. We stock the library with the books that confirm our deepest beliefs. We build a fortress of reason, and we call it ourselves. It is a sturdy, impressive structure. And then, as the night falls, the night of a personal failure, a loss, a quiet despair that no accomplishment can touch, we find that the fortress has become a prison. The walls we built to keep the chaos out are now blocking the starlight. This is the final and most terrifying frontier of Bacon's philosophy. It is not enough to break the idols of the tribe, the marketplace, the theater. We must finally turn and face the idol that sits on the highest altar, the idol of our own brilliant, logical, and ultimately limited intellect. Bacon's great project was a declaration of war on received wisdom. He said, "Do not trust what your tribe tells you is true. Do not trust the clever wordplay of the marketplace. Do not trust the grand, simplistic narratives of the philosophers. His theater But he went further. He identified a fourth category, the most insidious of all, the idols of the cave. For everyone, he wrote, has a cave or den of his own, which refracts and discolors the light of nature. This is the personal prison. The unique distortions born from your temperament, your education, your private obsessions and fears. The mathematician sees a world of equations. The poet sees a world of metaphors. And each is trapped in the cave of his own specialty, mistaking the shadow on his wall for the sun outside. But how do you break an idol that is made of the very substance of your own thinking? It is like trying to see the back of your own head without a mirror. It is like trying to taste your own tongue. The tool you would use to break it, your intellect, is the very material from which the idol is forged. This is the exquisite, silent crisis. This is the moment where the great thinker, the master analyst, arrives at the edge of his own map and sees only a blank space and the words, "Here, there be dragons." It is a spiritual crisis disguised as an intellectual one. For Bacon, the only way out was a radical, almost religious humility before nature. He called for us to become like little children again, to approach the world not with our grand theories, but with a naked, receptive attention, to put nature on the rack and torture her for her secrets, as he so famously said, sounds violent, but it is really an admission that our polite questions will get us nowhere. We must be willing to let nature break our theories. We must be willing to be wrong. We must be willing to sit in the dark without the comforting candle flame of our own cleverness, and simply wait for our eyes to adjust. And what do we see in that dark? When we have stopped projecting, when we have stopped analyzing, when we have accepted that the fortress of our mind is a beautiful fiction, what remains? We see the world as it is, not as we have decided it must be. And in that seeing, there is a peace that surpasses all understanding. It is the peace of the empty room. It is the peace of the scientist who, after a lifetime of failed hypotheses, finally witnesses the pure, unadulterated data. There is no story, no ego, no victory. There is only the thing itself, the coolness of the pillow, the weight of the blanket, the slow, tidal rhythm of your own breath. This is the final gift of this dark philosophy. It is not a set of answers to help you sleep. It is a method for gently dismantling the very need for answers. It is an invitation to break the last idol, the idol of your own busy, chattering, problem-solving mind, and to sink, at last, into the receptive, the observant, the silent. To become not a thinker in the world, but a part of the world. To feel the truth, not know it. And in that feeling, you are no longer separate. You are no longer a scalpel. You are the body. You are no longer an architect. You are the landscape, the boundaries you worked so hard to build, to understand, to defend, simply dissolve. And what is left is a profound, wordless belonging, a belonging not to an idea, but to the silent, ongoing fact of existence. The candle has guttered out. The chamber is dark. And now, at last, you can see.